Well. Test. Is anybody out there? Not so far, I guess. I'm just checking chat. If you can hear me and if you can hear Kat, then please write so in the chat so I know that you're there. And we'll see what happens. Maybe everyone is just like watching football, although I have no idea what game is today. Because I'm really bad at this. Anyway, welcome all. We just assume that you can hear us. Otherwise, just complain. There we are. Hi, Jen. How you doing? I'm glad you can make it. I assume you can hear me. In that case, let us begin with today's post summer solstice almost a St. John's stream, and I have a wonderful guest today. That is Kat, the fairy librarian, and I'm really happy that this time it works. We originally planned to have a conversation in April, and then I found out that I couldn't do the stream because of life, and then in May it didn't work. So I'm really glad this finally happened. You may know Kat from the Fairy Librarian, where she does book conversations. You may have met her in one of Matt on Books Sunday pubs before, and yeah, I'm really happy you're here. Kat, who are you? What should people know about you? And well, also, cheers.
So, hi, I'm Kat. Thanks for introducing me a little bit. But I am a booktuber, big shock. My channel is The Fairy Librarian, where I read books, because it's booktube. I read a little bit of everything, but mostly fantasy, I'd say. I do weekly reading vlogs where I talk about stuff, and that's my channel, I guess.
Yeah. Very good. Hello, Ori, and hello, Ben, and hello, Cleo, and hello, Alicia. This seems to be the first time that you're watching my stream, Alicia. I hope you like it here. And Cleo, I don't remember if I've seen you here before. Anyway, glad you could make it. And yeah, let's go back to your stuff. You're mostly doing like the weekly vlogs. Is that something that you kind of decided to do from the start, or did you settle in those reading vlogs casually or like over time, or how did that happen?
The thing, I joined BookTube like a lot of people do because I wanted to talk about books, and I wanted to be able to talk about my thoughts whenever I got them and as I was reading the books. And so vlog style is easiest for that. So that is why I did that, because I was in a few Discords, but I get overwhelmed and I get a little anxious sometimes. And especially because I read so widely, like if I'm in a Discord with only fantasy readers, I feel weird talking about like this random, I don't know, romance book that I'm reading, or the other way around. So I thought, you know what, let's do vlogs and I can talk about books when I'm reading, and I'm not bothering anyone if they don't want to hear me, because then they just don't watch my video.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like, as you said, like you read incredibly widely, like far more widely than I do. So I was wondering, like, did you always read widely, or is this something that kind of developed casually? Not casually, like developed like slowly over time. Because a lot of us start out with like the one thing that we love, and whether that is like fantasy or whether it's different forms of like YA or crime or whatever, and then we slowly branch out. Or was that always like the case that you're like widely interested in all kinds of stuff and just grab stuff?
I've always had a wide taste. I think there were a few genres that I wasn't necessarily reading a while ago, like horror. I think like my first horror book that I read was in 2021. It was a genre I always assumed I wouldn't like, and I still don't read a ton of that, but a little bit more. And I do like it when I do. read it.
What was the first one?
Mexican Gothic. Actually, I
Oh,
read that for school.
wow.
We had
Wait.
English class, and we could choose the book ourselves. It just had to be originally written in English, and we had to read it in English. And so I read that, and I had a really interesting conversation about it with my teacher. So
Interesting. I still want to read Mexican Gothic, or in general, I want to finally start reading Silvia Moreno Garcia, because I've only seen her in interviews, and she seems really smart and really cool. It might also be the case that she's usually having like these long interview conversations with Lovely Tidar, which makes it even more interesting to me. I've always wanted to read like the one from last year, Silver Nitrate. That sounded really interesting as well. So I'm glad that Mexican Gothic got you into horror, and I assume that means you kind of liked it.
yeah, I did. I think if I would read more horror, I would have to reread it to know if it holds up, because like the first thing you read of a type, you're often a bit more like positive about it, I guess, because you don't necessarily know what is out there. Like if you like the thing, so for example, maybe I just like horror, and that was the first time that I encountered such thing. And if I would have more things to compare to, maybe it wouldn't hold up. So like I can't say definitively if Mexican Gothic is like a book. Also because like I was 17.
Look, compared to the stuff I read when I was 17, I think Mexican Gothic is very much a step upwards in like both literary quality and a lot of other things.
Well, so, yeah, I do think like it is a good introduction to Silvia Moreno Garcia.
I don't know.
So I don't know.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I knew you would know that, Ori, that you probably read. And I think what's his name? Someone on Jolene's server also has read Silver Nitrate and spoken highly about it. So yeah. So how did you end up like picking Mexican Gothic? Just because you heard people on BookTube talking about it? Because I think I remember it being pretty popular on BookTube, or like
Yeah, it was
much talked about.
Yeah, it was quite popular on BookTube. It also won a Goodreads Choice Award for that year.
Yeah.
So like I heard people, talk very highly of it, and I had to pick a book in English, and so I went to the library to see what books they had in English, and that was there, and I was like, sure, this looks good.
Well, I mean, that's a very good approach. That's like something I wanted to ask you, because, as you said, you read very widely. It's like, how do you pick books? Because it's like, for me, it's fairly simple. It's like, yeah, I read dude fantasy. It's very simple. It's like, how where do you find books? You just mentioned BookTube, and you went to Goodreads, and Goodreads awards and stuff like that. It's like, me being like ancient, I'm really bad with all the social media stuff, so I don't do that. So I was wondering, like, how do you pick books?
Where I get to know about books is
like
primarily through BookTube.
Okay.
But also just some other places. Like I have, my library has this service that I signed up for, that they send me book recommendations every month. They're not always very good recommendations, but I get to know about books that I wouldn't know about otherwise. Or just browsing through the library and just, oh, this cover looks nice, and I'm reading the back description and like,
yeah,
that sounds fun.
Hello, Kadia and Cleo. Yes, it says Primordial. It's a weird folkish black metal band from Ireland, from the Republic of Ireland, as they are always saying, because it's obviously important. And they started out as a black metal band and are doing weird stuff now. It's all very depressing, and how it is to live in a in a post-colonial Ireland and stuff like that. So yeah, and I like them because they're kind of dark and angry. which
I love
is
these, like,
clearly
they're depressing. I like them.
they're super depressing. Like one of their like biggest hits, so to speak, is called The Coffin Ships, which is obviously about, well, the coffin ships, which are the ships that a lot of people during the Great Hunger, that that time when England decided to just like genocide a bunch of Irish people because it's more important to extract rent from properties than actually have people feed themselves. So yeah, that's that. Oh no, you're right, Cleo. I don't like Dark and Angry, and I think Kat just got dropped out, so I'm figuring out what happened. Oh, you're back.
I'm still here. It
You
was
you
an
were
11 or left. I just didn't say anything.
no, you got like very very quiet. Okay, sorry, because I got on my first anti-capitalist rant, I guess. That that's interesting though. That recommendation thing, is that like run by like an algorithm, or is it like actual librarians going like, hey, Kat just like borrowed these 5 books. I guess she also likes this one.
No, I'm pretty sure it's an algorithm. They also like keep giving me like a second recommendation, and I'm not interested. Like, they keep giving it to me. But
Hey,
they
biggest.
give me like they give you like 30 every month. So like,
Mhm.
I mean, it makes sense that there are like some are better than others.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, sometimes I do see a book on there and I'm like, oh, I want to read that.
Yeah, that's good. Like, I'm really bad at recommendations in general, because my problem is obviously that, like, if someone tells me to do something, I always do the opposite. So every time I see book recommendations from like an algorithm, whether it's on Audible or Amazon or whatever, and it's like, you, like Goodreads as well, it's like, you might want to read this. And I'm like, no, definitely not.
So if I want you to read a book, I should say, Ralph, certainly don't read this because you're going to hate it. And you would never, ever, 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 ever can read this book, and then you're going to read it.
Probably. If you need to find a way to make me read it out of spite. That's usually the way to go. Hello, also. Also is the guy who has done the amazing thumbnail this time round. And yeah, hope you're doing good also. And are not once again driving across the highways of America delivering food to people that then don't tip you. Which is what I assume you're doing right now. I'm glad to hear that, biggest. I you're one of the few people that actually listen to me when I tell them to read books, so I'm very happy it actually works. Okay, you already said that you're a student at Cat. What are you studying, or the other way around? What are you not yet studying? Because every time we talk, you have like added another 5 languages to what you're studying.
So the main thing I'm studying is Latin and Ancient Greek. I plan on taking on Hebrew next year.
Nice.
I took a Sanskrit class this year. Yeah, that's it for now.
Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin so far.
Yeah.
All right, and Hebrew. I took 1 semester of Sumerian once at university because I wanted to, or because I read too much Neil Stevenson, or both. Because I had read Snow Crash a bunch of times, and Snow Crash. One of the parts of Snow Crash is that it's also very much about Sumerian language and how it may be used to program our minds. It's a sci-fi novel, and you talk about like people that know to speak Sumerian can be neurolingual hackers. And then I saw that our university was actually offering a course in Sumerian. I'm like, fuck yeah, I want to be a neurolingual hacker.
Sumerian is that language is radical. Like,
absolutely,
they have all the grammatical information of the entire sentence like on the last word.
Yeah. Most thing I remember is.
Oh.
Yeah, that might be a tough one also. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there are courses to learn that, but although Germany has this weird obsession with different native languages and native culture, all because of that one guy that we had that was Hitler's favorite author, who wrote a bunch of Western stories, and Germans fell all for it and decided to do all kinds of historical recreation and reenactment and stuff for native culture. And the weird byproduct is that we have a couple of like leading experts on now more or less extinct native languages because they started doing that like in the late 19th century and kept doing that, which is so fucking random.
Yeah. I have a friend who has studied Akkadian. I'm not sure what the English word exactly.
Akkadian.
Akkadian.
Okay. Yeah.
Akkadian. And she's like, I didn't learn German during my class. I learned German during Akkadian because like the only thing I can find on Akkadian is in German. Like the only text.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because it's partly because Germany got so really late into the whole like colonialism business that all the interesting parts were already taken when it comes to like cultural colonialism, like or going grave robbing in the Near and Middle East and the Mediterranean. So that's why like a lot of like Greek and Greek stuff was written in English because the British went and plundered all of Greece, and you have a lot of like French stuff when it comes to Egyptology because Napoleon went there. And interestingly enough, at that point, well, that part of the Ottoman Empire, and then later obviously like what became Iraq and those areas, were still sort of up for grabs when it comes to sending people there and digging up shit, and that's what Germans went for, and that's why we have all that like scholarship, classic scholarship when it comes to Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian, all of that stuff. A lot of it is written in German because that's the only place we could still grave rob at that point.
There's some Greek stuff in.
We just went and dynamited Troy, but that's.
Well, you also had Ulrich von Milamowitz-Mödendorf, who's like a very important philologist for ancient Greek. So.
Yeah, and obviously we had like Mommsen for Roman law stuff, and Germany had a lot of historians, but like the whole like actual digging up stuff was mostly done in Bavaria. So that's like an interesting thing. So you're doing a lot of like linguistics, old language linguistics. How does that impact your reading? Like has that like had an effect on you? It's like, for example, when I studied philosophy and studied history, it's like I can't read certain books now without my history or philosophy brain going on. I was like, no, this is wrong. It's like, do you have like a similar? You notice like a similar effect from studying in the humanities on your reading habits or like your way of reading books?
I'm not sure if it's necessarily because of this. I don't know. Like I haven't really dived into the genre before, but like I really want to like that genre, but I just don't because I get too angry at them and they annoy me too much.
Yeah, I figured that might be something of that sort. Like, but like, what gets you angry? The factual errors, or more like a general like the way they deal with the topics? Is like,
what mostly bothers me is sort of you have these like feminist retellings now that the problem with that is that a lot of people don't know like a lot of mythology. Like all they know comes from these retellings, and they think that we don't hear from women, or like women are barely in these stories, or that there are no stories about women, and they sort of create that whole perception of Greek mythology, and that bothers me a little bit. And to the point where sometimes I find like some original stories from the time more feminist in these quote unquote feminist retellings in
Yeah,
certain cases.
I assume you watched that like one video recently on like Greek myth retellings.
Yeah, and
That
it
like,
and I was
yeah,
like, it was like I was almost like yes, 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 yes. There were things that I'd already noticed, but I didn't really know
yeah,
how to
yeah, yeah.
put them into
I,
words. But yeah.
like there was like a like an article on the Nerds of a Feather blog that does a lot of like fairly like really good sort of like fantasy and science fiction genre fiction coverage in general, and they had one on the same things like, no, having a woman protagonist does not make your story a feminist retelling. And I'm like, yeah, you're right.
And also like the Odyssey, for example, with a very big,
Yeah,
important work. Women
yeah, the
are
original
female
adventure
characters are
story.
a huge part of that story.
Yeah,
It's like to the point where there's a certain group of scholars who are like, was it written by a woman? Question mark.
mm-hmm.
And I just think that a lot of the nuance gets lost by like, oh yeah, we finally put these voices forward or
Yeah,
something. Because
yeah,
there
and
were
it's like,
interesting discussions to be had. Like a lot of the story that are like focusing on the women and the main characters are women are tragedies, which is an interesting thing to comment on.
yeah.
But like, you're not doing that.
Yeah, definitely. There would be a lot of interesting stuff to do there. I mean, it's one of the reasons, like, why I was like, "Hey, for the thumbnail, let's use like Jason and Medea one because, like, obviously Medea is probably my favorite um, woman hero from Greek mythology because she's got it right and she's angry and she actually does all the hard work and then does cool stuff afterwards. But it's still dark, and I think that often kind of gets lost in retellings in general because um, it's difficult to sort of like transfer like the cultural like context that is important to understand why certain things are perceived as tragic. So we just like amp up the violence on the one hand and take like our current cultural context and sort of like wrap it around the basic plot and then try to make a point there. And I think that can get difficult very quickly or can fail very easily.
Also, just in tragedies, like violence was never on scene.
No.
You heard like there was some guy telling like, "Hey, something happened over there that you didn't see." Like, and it's about how the characters react to the things that happen to them, not about the things themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that we've also sort of lost it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that might be just like part of the fact that a lot of fiction in general today is very heavily action focused and not so much
Yeah.
about like internal conflicts, and that there's probably
Yeah, I
reasons
meant
for that.
just storytelling as a whole.
Yeah,
Sort of lost
yeah,
that.
yeah. I'm always wondering why that is. Maybe it's because the way the dominance of like visual media, like movies and television, and obviously now even more active like video games where you actually act are like very action focused forms of storytelling versus maybe books or tragedies or whatever
Yeah, but
where when you
and
only have the
also
word.
they were plays, so there were visual also. So
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Also, yeah, I think Dr. Jones is probably the most well-known American archaeologist. That makes sense.
Oh no. Some true archaeology there.
Jin, I don't know if anyone else is getting buffering. Could be my internet is probably okay, but my computer is old and dying, so I don't know.
I'm actually gonna
So
open a bottle now because I thought I'm on your channel. I
yeah,
don't do beer. I don't love it. Fake Belgian, I know. So I have apple cider, but
that's fine.
cheers.
Well, cheers. Belgian citizenship immediately revoked.
Yeah, I'm also not the hugest fan of chocolate, so like I'm gonna have like the Secret Services at my door in like 5 seconds.
So, how angry do you get when someone calls them French fries? Okay, I guess you're still partly Belgian.
Let's just agree that it's Belgian fries and that is the only name. Or like you as a British and call them chips and not offend anyone.
Yeah. I guess you're not alone when it comes to fake Belgians. Apparently, Cleo also doesn't like beer or doesn't like chocolate. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah.
We're gonna take over power together.
Okay. Well, I mean, if there's one country we're taking over the government seems to be very easy, then it's definitely Belgium, because you guys don't have one, right?
And even if we have, if we have them, we have a lot of them. So, it averages out to we always have one government.
Yeah. So what I always find interesting also, like when we, talk about the Greek myth retellings and the way they are framed at the moment, it's like, obviously there's like, the general publishing market behind it. It's like, apparently, obviously, when Madeline Miller published Song of Achilles, I think that was the first one. Or was Circe the first one? No, I think it was Song of Achilles, which I haven't read. And it got like a big success. Like everyone was starting to publish these, and it's like, there's like, I'm wondering when they're running out of like Greek, like women from Greek mythology that they can turn into books. Like this year, there's definitely one about Medusa and one about Hera, and I think I remember 2 or 3 others that I just like scrolled over. Like, oh gods.
They never will. I've lost count with the amount of like Trojan cycle retelling that there are, especially like Clytemnestra is like, I mean, I get it. Like it's an interesting story to tell, but like at some point you need to stop what you're not doing.
So here's a question: like, what would be your the one part of like Greek mythology and Greek like literature when we move from or like then that later on like Roman, like which one would you pick if you say like this one needs to be talked about more? Because obviously everyone knows about the Odyssey and everyone knows about the Trojan War stuff, and possibly some people even know about the Argonauts, but which one would you pick if you had to go like read this one? This is the Greek thing you need to talk about.
That's a difficult one. I think like comedies have just not been done a lot. Mm-hmm. I felt like we could do a comedy just to change things up.
Yeah.
There is one about like there's a war and there's a bunch of women who don't want the war anymore, and so they say,
"Oh, that one! I always keep forgetting the name, but yeah, the one with the sex strike."
Yeah, Lysistrata.
Lysistrata, yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
That could be fun. Or like I can only think of like really well-known ones. I don't know what else would be a fun one.
Yeah, I feel like the problem with a lot of like the comedies, like the classic comedies, like a lot of like Aristophanes is like just really hard to understand the humor, because it's even more reliant on like local cultural things. When he makes like a dumb joke about some random Athenian guy, and it's like, yeah, I don't get it. It's like in the same way that reading parts of like Dante is like really hard. It's like, why is this guy in this circle of hell? So you need like a long explanation to understand why he is there.
But then there's also like you have the old comedy and you have the new comedy.
Yeah.
Where the new comedy being like Menander, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a lot more like just like having like these stereotypes of types of people that could still be funny today.
Yeah, probably.
There's a lot of really like weird shit happening in his things.
Yeah, that might be like another part, like like a lot of like Greek comedy, the stuff that I know, which is like obviously not as much as you, but it's like a lot of it is like incredibly like well, both sexual in a lot of ways, like a very, very dirty kind of humor often. Maybe that's just not something that we want to put into like novel retellings that are marketed to a,
But then
more
if you look
younger
at the
audience.
Song of Achilles, there is also like pretty explicit sex scenes in that. So like,
Yeah, I think that's like things like having explicit sex scenes is not so much the thing, but making explicit sex jokes feels different in a way. Using sex as humor, I think, is something that a lot of people maybe object to.
no, yeah, I don't know.
Ori.
I prefer like a sex joke now and then to like a sex scene that I have to read through, but okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I don't know. I always have like a soft spot for Aristophanes. We talked about a lot of like at university when we did like a lot of like Socratic dialogues. Obviously, you have to talk about Aristophanes' portrayal of Socrates in that regard, and then I I absolutely love the Lavitida retelling of or like adaptation or whatever you want to call it of Arthurian stories by Force Alone has this quote like possibly fake quote at the opening which says like fuck him if they can't take a joke, Aristophanes of Athens. And I'm like, yeah. I would have to double check if that is not actually something he said.
That's actually Catullus.
Yeah,
He has a poem like that where he's like threatening to words I'm not gonna say on YouTube from people because like they don't understand that like just because he talks about sex a lot in his poems that he's not sex obsessed.
I just today I read something where at some point someone described Catullus as the Roman master of the diss track, which I found so funny. And like, yeah, that scans.
The master of what?
Of the diss track, like in hip hop, when you write a diss track and just like talk shit about someone else.
Oh yeah. I like a lot of just sexual, like really obscene, explicit language.
True.
There's a reason he wasn't read in schools for a very long time.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, I always wanted to make a video about the Satyricon, which I think is like one of the funniest older texts in a lot of ways. But also, like, how can I talk about the Satyricon in a YouTube video without getting like completely demonetized and getting like the 18+ censor on that? Which is apparently also the first like evidence of like a classic werewolf tale in Western literature, the Satyricon.
I don't know a lot about the Satyricon, so possible.
It's absolutely hilarious. It's basically like what if the Hangover movie was actually a Roman satire? Because it's like about this bunch of dudes going through somewhere in Asia Minor and falling sort of like from one kind of stupid crime to like the next orgy because they're constantly drunk and ending up in these weird situations, and also lots of gay sex.
Yay.
I
was just thinking of another story that maybe we should adapt more. And that's Niobe. She had a bunch of kids, and then she said to Leto, who's the mother of Artemis and Apollo, and she said like, my kids are better than yours. And then Apollo killed all her sons, and Artemis all her daughters, and then like Niobe herself turned to stone and stuff.
Yeah, I feel like having more of these like sort of competitive kind of stories, I think makes a lot of sense in that regard. Like, yeah, challenge the gods on like, hey, look, my kids are better. Like that's a cool story. And I think something you can actually, do something in like a modern context, because there's obviously some very interesting messaging about like thematic work around, the idea of hubris on the one hand, but also on like, even coming to the point where you're like, hey, being able to challenge gods in a way. I think that's like an interesting topic. Yes. So like,
if you're gonna go challenging gods, there's also one that I like, which is about Marcias, who was a satyr, and Athena had made a flute, but like Hera was kind of laughing at her when she played it because like her face looked all weird when she was trying to play it. So she was like, I don't want it anymore, and she threw it away. And the satyr found it, and he was like, with this, I can play better music than Apollo. And then they had like a music competition.
oh, that's the one. Yeah. There's a lot of these stories in like Greek myth where humans are, non-gods are sort of like competing against gods. Well, that's like the things like the music competition kind of also has that, like, what if he actually wins? And how will gods react in that situation? Probably not well.
I mean, the thing was rigged because like the jury was like the muses and they're friends of Apollo, but like,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, the fiddle contest with the devil is the same kind of thing, and then of course you have like the fun, like in Norse mythology, the Thor's trip to Utgard Loki, when they have like these 3 competitions where Thor has to do like like a drinking contest, and Loki does like the eating contest, and what's his name? The kid that hangs around with Thor because he ate part of the magically regenerating ram, Chelvi, maybe. My Norse mythology is not very good. Has like a running competition, and you have all these like weird things. All muses are impartial. I don't know.
All the muses are definitely 100% fair and impartial all the time.
Hanging out on their mountain and all of that.
Yeah.
No burping contest, Ori. There, I don't think there's a burping contest in Norse mythology or any other mythology I know of, which is not that much actually. So one thing I found interesting, though, that I wanted to sort of like pick your brain on is like, as you have entered academia and stuff, like, has that in general sort of like changed your outlook on reading fiction? Because I know a lot of people that like read as kids and then they start going to university and stop reading. It's like, or suddenly think of fantasy or science fiction as, childish genres or whatever, and only read serious books like, I don't know, Dan Brown novels or whatever it is adults read. Like, do you see? Do you feel that sort of like view? Is that something that happens where, like, suddenly reading serious books for university, like, obviously reading Greek and Roman texts, like Latin texts, and reading books about that stuff, that kind of changes your attitude towards books in general?
Not really.
Okay.
I have always been a firm believer of every book has merit, and you can get something out of every book and something really meaningful out of every book.
Yeah.
That's also one of the reasons why I read so widely.
Because I recently, like, that's why I kind of came up with that. It's like I recently had that situation where I talked about books, and I was like, I realized I make I distinguish between academic books and nonfiction books, which is super weird and feels to me like I'm obviously very much projecting my own arrogance and elitist views on that. And that's like something I realized that definitely comes from me, hanging out at universities for a while. And I'm like, this is an academic book and this is a nonfiction book. Is it though?
I do think there's a difference because you're just writing for different audiences. If you're writing an academic book, you're generally writing like for people who are also academics in the same field, or like at least are knowledgeable in the same field, which is for more popular nonfiction books not necessarily the case. So I do think like distinguishing between the two is valid.
Yeah.
As long as you don't, you can distinguish between two categories without implying that one is better than the other.
Yeah, and that's sort of like what I was worried about, like when I try to examine my own like feelings about this, like that I am, sort of making an implicit value judgment, at least when it's like about the same kind of topics. Like, this is like a very specialized thing, and this is like a more general one. It's like, because as soon as you, at least from my perspective, like as soon as I go like, hey, I'm able to read the specialized one, so I put myself sort of in this closer, like smaller circle, like an in-group that is sort of like actively dealing with the subject versus, the people that get stuff explained to them. And it kind of scared me about myself, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know, but it's, yeah. It's important to be able to explain things also to people who are not necessarily knowledgeable about the thing or are new to a certain topic or field. Like that is also important, like an important skill to
Yeah, and
have.
I think like one that we only start to realize, like how important science communication, or in our case, general academic communication to the public is, how important that is, because someone needs to pay for that stuff.
So yeah, I don't know. It's not the academic papers are not necessarily better than the more popular nonfiction ones or like the general nonfiction ones, I guess. They're maybe more like specific because you can build on there's like you've read that or you know a lot of this, so you don't have to lay as much groundwork, so you can be more specific and go deeper. I guess that is maybe a benefit of the academic ones over the more popular ones.
I think like the interesting things like that all writing is in a way is communication. It's always like a dialogue, right? Writers are in dialogue with each other, obviously also in dialogue with their readers, but then again, writers are also readers. Like, and I think that kind of holds both for like academic discourse within papers, but it also holds for literature. It's like writers that write fiction, they also react to other writers that write fiction and so forth. But I feel like with the academic papers, maybe that's kind of the point. Is like that is a very very focused communication, like dialogue, in a way that general fiction or maybe also like general nonfiction is not so much, because you're not yelling at these 5 people that you're basically have in mind when you're writing your paper. It's like, I'm going to show them that I'm right and they're wrong. So you have like an actual argument. Whereas if you write towards like a broader audience, you don't necessarily have that. And I think maybe that's like the difference between academic and nonfiction, that it's in that regard. I don't know. Sorry, I didn't want to drag you into like me trying to figure out why I'm weird in that regard. Yeah. So, like a general thing, like you've been doing the booktube thing for a while now. It's like, but you mentioned that you still have like, are sometimes a bit anxious about this. Like, how are you feeling about the booktube thing in general? Like doing booktube videos. Are you like sort of like what are your goals? Do you want people to watch your stuff? Do you want people to yell at you in the comments? Do you just want to sort of like have a record of what your thoughts about books were, in a way? It's like, easier than writing a diary and trying to decipher your own handwriting like 10 years later, but you can just like watch the video. It's like, what's your goals with doing booktube?
I would like for people to talk to me, I guess. It's like I feel weird just talking to people in Discord sometimes.
Yeah.
And also like my friends in real life are kind of got tired of me talking about books. So like that was for me very much a thing, because like I'm autistic, so like if I'm into something, like I
Yeah.
just, that is my life. So like reading is
Yeah.
that, and I didn't really have a place where I felt I could be as into it and make it as big a part of my personality as I wanted to, without like annoying other people. And so that's why I did booktube, because like if people don't click on my video.
Yeah.
But so I want conversation. I want like to share my thoughts. I want to know other people's thoughts.
Yeah, I know I want people to talk to me. I know that it's like sometimes you make a video because you're like super excited about this one thing, and then it feels like screaming into the void sometimes, and then you're hoping that someone will at least react. But I think it, at least for me, it sometimes also like kind of takes away the pressure in the way that I'm making this video. And if nothing happens, then nothing happens. But at least I've spoken about it, and I know I have not annoyed my friends again.
Yeah.
A cosmic ball game against the denizens of the underworld. I'm pretty sure that's how England looks at the World Championship game against Germany in 1966. Yeah, this is my one football joke. I don't know anything about football. I don't even know how Germany has played in the championship so far, which is quite the achievement for me because it's happening around here. um, so you just wanted to talk about books, and how did you actually discover BookTube? Just like looked on YouTube and suddenly realized that people were talking about books on YouTube and not just sharing funny cat videos and I don't know, whatever it is people do on YouTube these days.
Yeah. The one thing is like my channel is quite small, and
Yeah, no.
in itself I don't mind that. Like I don't want to be like someone who's like like a million subscribers. That's never going to happen. But like that's not who I want to be necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the thing I wanted is like talking to people, and like now I get like one comment per video sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, okay.
Well, I guess everyone in this chat has now to go and subscribe to Kat and leave one comment about something.
But yeah, honestly, like you don't even need to talk about something that I've read. Just like say what you did that day, and I'm happy. That's the thing. Like I don't need a bunch of people to just subscribe or whatever. I just like talk to me, or even in Discord, like talk to me.
And let's move on to more like book stuff. What were your favorite books that you've read so far this year?
That's hard. I've really recently I really liked a comic series, which is called The Castle in the Stars. I just read like the last volume before this live, and I'm a little upset right now because I thought it would be like the last in the series, but like the way it ends suggests that there's going to be more, and I was not prepared for that. So now I'm like, now I have to wait. For this
The
thing to come
Castle
out.
and the Stars. Where's that from? Like which country?
It's a French comic.
Ah, okay.
It's a historical sci-fi.
Nice.
It's like alternate history. Basically, the premise is, what if humans reached the moon 100 years earlier than they did? And we see like the political things that happen with that, and like how like science can never be apolitical, like how people will always use science for their own gain, and then like we have a lot of colonialism on like other planets because we reach other planets and there's life on Mars. I think it's really funny because like Mars, a lot of the creatures. Sorry, I love this. A lot of the creatures are like resemblant of sea creatures, except Mars is this giant desert, so it's like floating through the sky, and I think it's really funny.
So it's basically For All Mankind, but in steampunk.
I don't know the first thing, but I guess yes.
For All Mankind is a sci-fi show that is like, what if the Russians actually, like the Soviet Union actually is on the moon first, and then it kind of spins off from there. I haven't watched it because I don't watch TV, but this sounds really cool. If I had to guess, the one person in like watching the stream who may have read the comics would be Ori, and if not, I suspect you would. This sounds like something you would like to read.
The art style is really reminiscent of Studio Ghibli, if you like that. Ghibli.
Okay.
Ghibli. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I've read it both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I was asking where the comic was from, because I feel like you have like the French and Belgian like continental European comic style, and then you obviously have like Japanese manga and whatever, and then you have like an American comic style. And they're very different traditions in both like in storytelling structure, like storytelling, but also in art style and like a lot of other things. So that
Yeah, I mostly read like the Franco-Belgian comics. That's mostly like the type of comic that I'm into.
I don't know. Like the only one I read was always Asterix because we had them lying around. Like everyone, I feel like everyone in Europe has read Asterix, and I have no idea if anyone outside of Europe has read them.
I don't know either. They're great though.
At least the early ones. I think at some point they really lost their way, but the early ones are incredibly funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're obsessed with the castle and the stars in the stars.
The Castle in the Stars.
Okay, that sounds really cool. And it's an ongoing series right now, or it's an older one?
It's ongoing right now, apparently.
Apparently. Yeah. I had that like years ago. Like I was reading like a novel, and I didn't know it was actually like a series. And suddenly it's like, wait, I thought I would not start another series, and suddenly I find out there's like more books coming, possibly in the future.
Yeah. I mean, part of me is happy because I really like it. So like I always want more, but also I'm like, I thought I would have closure. Like a real ending today. But no.
Asterix in Belgium. And no, I don't think Asterix ever came to Ireland, only to to Britain. Asterix and Cleopatra is so funny. The movie, the whole like when they mix like the poison thing, the song is so good. Anyway, yeah.
I'm gonna turn on the light because it's getting dark. 1 second.
Yeah. See, that's the difference. Here it's already dark, but you're like I don't know, 500 kilometers to the west, maybe 300.
There we are.
All right. So you've read that. Anything else that you're like reading at the moment, or like looking forward to reading this year? Sort of. Not only fantasy, obviously.
I am currently reading Lavinia by Ursula Le Guin to get back to the myth retelling. But I'm like, I'm not hating this one. So that's something. It's very meta because like she comments about like her being a character in a story, and then like the poet already being dead, but also not yet being born, and it's like
Nice.
It's very meta, and I really like it.
Yeah, or you're right. Like a lot of Asterix is very racist in, or at least like a lot of the humor is built on specific national stereotypes. I mean, it's racist in that sense. Like, all of Belgium is constantly frying everything, is what I've learned from Asterix. But then I went there and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
We're only frying things half of the time.
I'm pretty sure you've already fried. No, the Scottish fried chocolate. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, Le Guin is like a fascinating writer in that she brings so many like different layers to everything that I think, like, it's one of the things that I like about Ursula Le Guin, both with her like her essays and the novels and the short stories. Like, a lot of Le Guin is like has this meta level as it's always also a reflection about writing and how to tell stories, and a reflection about storytelling while telling a story.
Yeah. There was like one quote that I liked. It was like, it was something about like Aeneas arriving and speaking perfect Latin, and how is that possible? Never heard Latin. Like, yeah, and now you can read this book and understand me while you also don't know Latin. I was like, I do. But it's like, and then it's like, I guess it's not language that makes us understand, but poetry or something. I don't know the exact quote, but something along those lines. And I thought that was a really interesting idea.
Hey, Britain, and hello, Daniel. Yeah, indoor frying is a bit of a problem, I guess. Streaming while frying. We're not doing cooking streams here, so no frying today. But glad you could join us. So you're having a lot of fun with Lavinia. I mean, obviously, it also was way before like the current sort of like trend of myth retellings. Do you think it's going to be over soon, or do you think it's going to continue until like, I don't know, the year 2027 or whatever?
I think it'll stop as soon as it becomes less popular and there's less demand, and then publishers are going to publish less. So it'll depend on whether people keep reading them or not.
What you're saying is that possibly the Greek myth retellings will be totally eclipsed by dragon porn.
Yes, or blue alien porn.
Oh, the Ice Planet Barbarian one, or what? I have not yet read that, and I assume it would be a good idea if I don't.
Or it is not yet dying, but we could kill it if we want. We could just stab it and then dispose of the body. No one will ever know that it was us.
Yeah, the golden age of Greek myth retellings is over. And then we get like a panel together, have like a panel discussion with Homer and a bunch of other, and Sophocles, and they're like, no, Greek myth retellings are totally a thing. We're still doing it. We're around.
I would do that as a sketch. Like I would totally do that.
Yeah, yeah, that would be really funny. Is retelling of the Trojan War over? And then you have like Sophocles and the other guy sitting there. No, totally not.
I mean, I do think that, like, I'm very interested in reception history and just how people use myths and look at myths and stuff. Like, I think that is very interesting. But I don't think we're at an interesting spot in that history right now.
Yeah. That's true. Wait, Cleo, are you saying you started reading Ice Planet Barbarians or another one of these books? Just out of curiosity. Anyway, talking about dragon porn, you have in fact read Fourth Wing. I have not.
Yes, I'm gonna read the second book in July.
Okay, so you did enjoy it.
I just had fun. And I listened to the audiobook when I was traveling, and so like I was in the car for 10 hours on end.
Yeah.
And it kept me entertained during those 10 hours. So
I would never hold Ice Planet Barbarians against anyone. Look, I listen to Manowar, and if you've ever looked at any of their cover artworks, Ice Planet Barbarians is harmless. But yeah, yeah. I mean, it's easy to. I think it's easy to listen to all kinds of stuff when you're like traveling. And like, I once listened to. I don't know what it was. Like, I had to train back from Budapest to Frankfurt, and like when I was Budapest to Munich, and then from Munich to Frankfurt. But I was like on trains for like 12 hours, and you get a lot of reading or listening done in that time.
I think I
Hey,
just
Britain.
stopped for a minute.
Oh, okay. I was just saying then that like listening to audiobooks is super easy when you're traveling long trips. Hello, Britain. What chat room are you in at the moment? Anyway, I'm glad you made it here. We're talking about Ice Planet Barbarians and Fourth Wing, and how you can take positive things out of every book.
We're basically talking about like Huff's new favorite books of all time. You should read them next, and like maybe you'll love them.
Look, there's a lot of things wrong with Joey DeMaio, and his bass playing is part of it, but unfortunately, the smallest part. But yeah, so what would be the positive you would like, the meaningful things you took away from Fourth Wing? And like, here's the thing: it's like, if I ever read Fourth Wing, I will read it on my own and have thoughts on it, and I will not make a video about it because I don't want to be another person telling people why, a book that is not for me is not for me. I think there's books where it's easier to just not talk about it, even if I read it.
The thing with Fourth Wing, I don't know. It's been a while. I just remember having a lot of fun with it, which I think is valid in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Also, we have I forgot what it's called, but she has this chronic illness.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
That, like, we don't always see a lot of chronic illness representation in fantasy, or like disability in our fantasy protagonists.
Yeah.
So I think that like that could be valuable, and sort of like she's not, because of that, she's not physically the strongest, and she gets injured very easily, and so in direct combat she's not always easy, but she's really resourceful, and she seeks ways, like other ways to do things that like she seeks accommodations for herself, I guess.
Okay.
And I think that is a thing that could.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is interesting, because we don't see that many, like, well, not only in fantasy or science fiction. It generally, there are not that many characters with disabilities in books, for all kinds of reasons. And yes, Ida, if I read Fourth Wing and I like it, then I will definitely make a video about it and tell everyone why they're wrong when they're bashing it. I just suspect that I won't like it because it doesn't sound like the kind of book I would like, no matter what, like no matter the hype. It's just not. I mean, I don't necessarily like magic school settings in general, and from what I can tell, it's like evil military academy school, but it's still like a school setting, right, with like different teams and whatnot. And
Daniel, the part where they get super horny because their dragons are having sex is the best part in the book. I just think it was so funny. It's just like their dragons are having sex, and so they're super horny because of it, and they don't want it. It's like, get away from me now.
Hey, Ron, there you are. You're the other person that has read Silver Nitrate, right? By Silvia Moreno Garcia. or like the other person that said that it's really good.
Horny Red Rising with better world building.
I can't say anything about that because I have not read Red Rising, because I suspect I would hate it.
I mean, the world building in Fourth Wing is pretty good.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
Oh yeah, right. You decided to actually read it, Britain. I remember that, and then I didn't watch the video that when you talked about it. But I think that's like another part. It's like that's something I found interesting. So you have like in that recent weird sort of discourse about the death of epic fantasy, and I don't want to get into that too much, but everyone was like sort of like dissing and hating on romantasy, and I was wondering how much of that is that dudes are incredibly uncomfortable with reading horny books, like or like books that actually portray sort of like romance, but also sex in I don't know, in a consensual and possibly actually enjoyable way. Because I sometimes feel like there's like a very specific form of like prudishness in parts of the more traditional epic fantasy, not only epic fantasy, but like a lot of like fantasy stuff. And I'm wondering how much that is sort of like tied to the fact that, dudes have a lot of weird hangups about sex, and reading about that from possibly even like a female point of view kind of makes them incredibly uncomfortable, and that's sort of why they kind of denigrate it in a way. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud here. So
Yeah, it was there's a channel I watch, it's called Bookworm Couple, and it's so he's a adult epic fantasy reader, and she's more of a romance / romantasy reader, and they're like letting each other read their favorites. I mean, and they also like read stuff together and read their own stuff, but
yeah.
like that is also a thing that they do. And there was I watched the video about Fourth Wing that they did, where the guy read Fourth Wing, and he said how he thought it was very interesting to, like, because he's used to like have the women being very objectified and sexualized and described in like a very sexual way, and it was like, it's a little weird and interesting to now see men being described that way, and it I think that is also a thing that like dudes are realizing, like, hey, I don't like this.
Yeah.
That is a thing that they're uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously there's like cultural prudishness in general, possibly in like the very specific Calvinist Protestant and almost dare I say puritanical, nonconformist background of large parts of American culture. But I think there's also like the same kind of thing for just the way men are socialized under patriarchy, where we also have like a very specific, almost antagonistic sort of relationship towards sex in a lot of ways. And it's like, yeah, like we grow up on Conan basically just having women swoon because of his sheer masculinity, but obviously nothing ever happens because Robert E. Howard was like
also,
probably the world's living biggest incel, like first incel with like writing with a writing career. Yeah, but yeah, you want.
Then also they're like they're more classic fantasy books, like from, I don't know, the 80s or something, that are horny as fuck. Like, but those are fine because they're written by men, I guess. I don't know, or they just haven't read those, people complaining. But like, writing smut in fantasy worlds is not a new thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. I mean, I don't know. I think it it kind of depends because like I don't know which kind of 80s books you have in mind that are incredibly horny. Obviously there is the weird bondage fetish of both Robert Jordan and to an even more aggressive degree in what's his name, Terry Goodkind. But a lot of it is still like sort of like very distant, like very clinical in a lot of ways, and I think that's maybe part of the way it is horny in a lot of ways, but it's
yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, hey Joe. First of all, welcome, and yes, gore is of course its very own thing. Yeah, Ron, definitely, it is the thews, the mighty thews, but they have to be knit to a keen fighting brain. Sorry, Kat. I don't think. Have you ever read a Conan story by Robert E. Howard?
No, and I'm glad I have.
No, some of them are actually really, really good. There are obviously, you know, they were written in the 30s, so there's that. But because you know there are Pulp Fiction written for magazines and so forth, there's a lot of like stock phrases that come up again and again and again, and one of them is that Conan has these mighty thews, and they're always knit to a keen fighting brain, which is just like such a weird phrase that comes up again and again when it's about like how he's both like punches but also punches really fast, and like yeah, I get it. I sometimes feel like people should read at least one Conan story in their life just to see like where it comes from and what it does. But then again, I also I've seen Matt's fantasy book reviews try to read Conan, and that was painful. When you say second book of the Empire trilogy, I assume you mean the one from Jenny Wirtz and Raymond Feist, or
that one has some sex in it. People aren't. That one has, I think, has more sex in it than Fourth Wing.
Which one?
Servant of the Empire.
Oh,
Fourth Wing doesn't have that much sex. Like it's pretty. Like it's like one scene or maybe two. It's really not as much as people make it out to be.
Yeah, although already that's the point, right? You put down Anne Rice and Jacqueline Carey, but those are women writing about sex. I think there's a fundamental difference in the way that men write about sex or don't write about sex, and the way women write about sex, and the way a lot of men read sex, and a lot of women, I don't know about how women read sex, but you know, I think there's a fundamental difference in that probably goes back to like the way we are socialized and the way we are sort of taught how to relate to all these things, and I just like from like having everyone sort of like look down on romantasy and paranormal romance and all of that stuff. A lot of time it's dudes, and it just feels like people are sort of like blushing in a very manly way, which is obviously shit talking, which is like the only way that we as men can deal with being uncomfortable.
Cleo, there is a lot of lust and like sexualized descriptions of people in Fourth Wing, but like actual sex scenes are not as much as people make it out to be. So like the lust is definitely there, but you know.
I still haven't read Curse of the Mistwraith, but I love the way that you say like, it's a love scene and not a sex scene if Jenny Wirtz wrote it.
That's also the thing that bothers me. Okay, this is slightly different, but there's a thing that really bothers me, and that is like literary fiction authors can write really long and uncomfortable sex scenes, and that is fine because it's art. And then like people shit on books like Fourth Wing for just being horny dragons, and I'm like, what is the difference?
What's the difference between the Nazi bondage coprophilia sex scene in Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon and the one scene where two people want to have consensual sex because their dragons are fucking? And that's the question. Is it just the framing, and what kind of framing is it, and how much of that is because it's either marketed at women or marketed at younger women, I guess, teenage girls and slightly above, the same way that, say, I don't know, you're the fairy librarian, you know about the Course of Thorns and Roses, not I, but like the way that is it just the marketing where it's like, if serious men with serious jackets and serious mustaches and serious cigars talk about Nazi coprophilia, then it's clearly art. Whereas if women talk about dragons being horny, then it's definitely not art.
I think there is just this, in just books and literature in general, there is this, it's getting better now, but we're still not there, where they're just shitting on women's stories. Like women's fiction as a genre, which is a terrible name for a genre, but whatever. I like reading those books. I read those books from time to time, and people shit on that genre, but sometimes the only difference between that and like a prize-winning highbrow literature thing is just like the gender of the protagonist, and it drives me up a wall.
Which is interesting because, like, the thing that I find fascinating about that is that, like anyone sort of like actually talking about literature and thinking about literature has noticed the fact that like having a female protagonist would like changes the perception of the book forever, but we're still doing it and it's still there. And it's like we've talked about it forever.
Yeah, it's like, and that's the thing that just bothers me with, like, you can distinguish between things, but that doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the others, and that is mostly the attitude that that really annoys me.
Yeah, I think like partly that's sort of like, I mean, it's very much like a form of distinction, or like of distinction within like cultural capital in like a Bourdieu sense of the words, right? You're trying to prove that you're better because you're enjoying this one over the other one, so you're claiming that this one is inherently makes you a better person for liking that or knowing that in a way. We have that in fantasy in general. Like reading Malazan and liking Malazan Book of the Fall makes you a smarter person. Like, no, it just means you like this very specific book, but like I'm not inherently smarter than other people because I like the Malazan Book of the Fall. Or like, I don't know, Gene Wolfe, Book of the New Sun is another one of those. And I think that's sort of like what kind of what bled through with that epic fantasy discussion in a lot of ways. Also, the idea is like books are better when they're bigger. It's like epic fantasy is good because it has 10 books and each of them has like 1,000 pages. That makes them very good books because they have like lots of words and there have to be some good words in there.
And at the same time, they're like complaining that books aren't edited enough and that they're getting too long. And I'm like, what do you want?
Yeah,
what do you want?
Yeah, I wish I knew. But that's like an interesting thing that I think like fascinating. And we can talk about that if you want to, because like obviously I'm a dude, and for me it's very easy to talk about stuff on the internet, and I guess I'm mostly perceived as either a fat drunk, which is a very masculine way of presenting, or I'm perceived as smart. But when I talk about books, even if I talk, stuff that is, arguably not, regarded as high culture or whatever. On the other hand, I feel like you obviously present as a woman. So do you think there's like the reactions to you talking about stuff are very different on the internet compared to what I get? And how does that actually impact your way of sort of talking about stuff?
On YouTube, I personally haven't noticed a lot of it, maybe because my channel is so small. but I do know like a lot of female creators, especially female fantasy readers, who get a lot of that. And like they have put like automatic filters in place on their comments, because we're like, if this comment contains one of these words, then like just auto delete it.
That makes
Just
sense.
keep their mental health. I don't know how like that is now, because when I heard those conversations was a little while ago, so I don't know if things got better. I hope they are, but I realistically, I don't think that much has changed. Yeah.
That was super fascinating. Last year, in preparation for that, definitely going to happen Brandon Sanderson video, I read a bunch of like articles and books on fandom studies and fan studies, which are obviously very much dealing with like gender questions, because a lot of like fandom has often and always, not all, not actually always been much more like dominated, like active fan cultures have often been like very much dominated by women and people of color and queer people and other like marginalized groups, because in active fan labor you can sort of like make your voice be heard and stuff like that, and how that kind of sort of like it's often contrasted and actually sort of almost weaponized with like put into conflict with the idea of the nerd as like as like mostly a white man, a man from like the 80s and so forth, and how like weird ideas of masculinity are sort of played out there, where you have like nerds being even more sexist because they feel that they're already like, for a long time they were sort of like, the image of the nerd was already sort of emasculating and effeminated in a lot of ways, so they try to overcompensate in the way they talk about stuff and become even more sexist because they feel they have to prove that they're like actual men in a lot of ways. And I wonder how much of that has sort of like carried over all the way into like the 21st century and like the way we still talk about books.
Books, I'm not sure, but what you said about the nerd thing, I had a female friend who was a gamer, and she was like, yeah, never tell, when you're gaming and like online, never tell people that you're a woman, because like you'll get hit on like within minutes.
Yeah.
And it's like, like, why?
Well, I mean, obviously, partly, I think it's the fact that within like the gender roles that we have, right? Men have growing up as a dude in like the 21st century is not necessarily always easy. Obviously, but it's different because you have like a very specific thing you kind of try to sort of aspire to, or you're supposed to be like, and if part of like what you do falls short of that, you kind of feel that you need to overcompensate in other areas, and it's a lot of it is like, I think, like rooted in like insecurity about not meeting standards that society has, or parts of society have sort of placed on you, and then you just lash out by being a massive dickhead, which there's no excuse for that. I just like trying to figure out where it might be coming from in some ways.
That is definitely part of it. It's just, I think like the easier part of it now is that nerd culture and being nerdy is sort of moving, or has moved more towards like the mainstream, I feel.
Very much. Mm-hmm.
So it's not as becoming like, like that one dude in his basement behind his computer, it's becoming more like broad and thereby also more diverse. And I think that there are definitely still issues, but I think it's getting better.
Yeah, I think maybe part of that is sort of like the same thing that you have like in like a generational conflict where older generations go like are always like we had it really hard in our time, so you kids shouldn't complain and so forth. So you have like people go like, we got mocked as nerds in the 80s, so people shouldn't have an easy time being nerds now, so we need to sort of like sort of continue that cycle of harm and of violence, sort of in a way. I think that that might be part of like the whole like nerds, even though like being nerdy, being interested in fantasy stuff is very much mainstream at this point. It's like you still need to behave, or like, there's still like a not a need, but like a certain tendency to behave like as if you were still sort of mocked for being a nerd.
Yeah.
So you keep repeating the you keep repeating the habits instead of actually moving forward, because they're just like you're going through the motions because they're so ingrained in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's like the we suffered, so now you have to suffer as well mentality.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's not exactly a healthy thing to do, right?
no.
It's actually, I think, like one of the core themes of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because obviously I'm contractually obliged to talk about obligated to talk about Malazan from time to time. It's like one of the core themes of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is how these sort of like cycles of harm and violence are sort of perpetuated, sometimes just because of like I had a shit time, so you gotta have a shit time as well, because we keep perpetuating that, and how that's kind of fucked up.
A little other sort of side of the coin. With football now, with the there was this Belgian football player. He was like, like football is like little boys look up to those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yeah, sure, I want to give an interview, but I like reading, so we're going to do it in a bookstore. And so, like, he gave this interview on TV in a bookstore.
Nice.
And I was like, I like you now for this. Also,
But
like, a black person also with, like, when you think of, like, a nerd, like, the stereotypical image is also very white often.
Yeah.
So I think,
yeah,
I liked it, like, hey, yeah, I'm a professional footballer, but also I like reading.
Yeah, that's like, I think the other part is like how much like reading or is like an aesthetic. There's always people talk about like how book talk has ruined reading because it's just an aesthetic and so forth. But like I feel there is something to that, both in both like the negative and the positive way, right? It's like if you don't present like someone who is erudite, right? People don't take your opinions on books seriously. You have to stand in front of like a bookshelf or sit in front of a bookshelf. There's like that thing in like where you have to present in a certain way just to be sort of like taken seriously within the discourse. And sometimes I feel that's like very much like a booktube or book talk thing as well. It's like me just hanging out and drinking beer and talking about books is already sort of on the border of respectability. On the other hand, if you're because obviously women are way more policed when it comes to visuals, like presentation in general. It's like if you present too masculine, or if you present too girly, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like these different aesthetics. Yeah. Like suddenly people won't take you seriously just because you, I don't know, wear pink or whatever, right? And it's like, this person can definitely not talk about Conan the Barbarian. She's wearing a pink blouse. That's illegal.
That's actually a thing I notice in real life sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, I have this pink jacket and this black jacket, and I noticed that like in some circumstances the way people talk to me is different depending on which one I wear.
It's so frustrating. I had that like a while ago. I used to have to go to certain like meetings for like the scholarship that I had, and there I had to wear like a suit. Because there were like board meetings, and you don't sit around talking about, for whatever reason, it's apparently not allowed to talk about like €1 million budgets wearing heavy metal shirts. I don't know why, but that's the rules. So I had to wear a suit, and like whenever I came back from that and I still had the suit on, very different people asked me if I needed help on train stations. Whereas if I walk around like I'm dressed right now, it's homeless people and punks. Those people ask if I need help. Refugees, homeless people, and punks are like, hey, you need help, whatever. As soon as I put on like serious clothes, suddenly everyone's like, oh, do you need help? And I was like, fuck you at that point. but that's a luxury because I can do that in a lot of ways, but I feel like it's probably more pronounced if you're a woman or if you're female presenting.
Or like I enjoy like wearing nice clothes, and I have my style, and I really like it, and it makes me really happy.
Yeah.
But I've had people think that I'm very just superficial and like I don't have much substance because of that, and I'm like, like putting on a pink t-shirt or a gray t-shirt takes the exact same amount of effort. Like,
Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of the heritage of that very specific, incredibly misogynist like stereotype of women being, all emotions and no like rational thoughts. So obviously they're stupid, and we can't talk about the serious stuff with them, and that image kind of keeps going, and while in generally some parts of Western society have moved on from that, it kind of is still there when it comes about like presentation and T-shirts, and it's like it's I think it's interesting to see, and it's frustrating to see how long these things kind of stick, because I suspect a lot of people like changing like the way they treat, like the way we treat them. I'm pretty sure I do the same thing in a lot of ways. Possibly not about looks, because you know I don't see what kind of shirt you're wearing. But like so much of that is sort of like subconscious in a lot of ways, and just like so heavily built in that it takes forever to kind of change that.
yeah. And I sometimes like I catch myself doing that as well. And I'm like, no, wait, why am I making assumptions about this person because like she's wearing a lot of makeup or something, like very like heavy, obvious makeup. Like,
Yeah,
that doesn't say anything about like
yeah, and
her.
that I think is like an interesting one, the one that you brought up with makeup, because I recently stumbled. I from time to time I click into like these like booktube newbie tags just to see what kind of people join booktube and decide to call themselves booktubers. And there was one that I keep forgetting what her name was. She was like, yeah, I'm an angry feminist booktuber and so forth, and she had like a long like part about just like how she, like an anti-makeup part, and I'm like, yeah, I get it, but it's so easy to go from like this makeup is sort of like what patriarchal society kind of forces on us because we need to present in certain ways and so forth, and I don't want to do that, and that is all correct. But as soon it's so easy to kind of sort of step over that line and suddenly turn it into a form of like misogyny again. It's like, yeah, because people
Yeah.
who are still doing that, even if they maybe like it for all kinds of reasons, suddenly they're devalued because you're reducing them to like the visuals, just like everyone is doing with people that it's very, I don't know, it's
And that's why I
frustrating.
like the movie Legally Blonde so much, is because that's like the whole thing that movie is about. Because like
Yeah,
people think that Elle is not very intelligent because she's feminine, and she presents very feminine, and like she wears a lot of pink and whatever. And like one doesn't have to exclude the other.
yeah. On that subject, there's a book, and it shows up in like the fantasy pre-order list for on Audible that I from time to time skim, and it's been there for like a year now, and it's driving me mad because it's called Medievally Blonde, and I'm like, I don't know what that book will be about.
I would hang on. Medievally Blonde?
Medievally Blonde, coming out in somewhere November, I think. I have no idea what it's about, but it's driving me nuts, that title. It's like, that's a very good title on the one hand, but it could also be just like really bad because it could just be too gimmicky as a title. It's like I spent all this time coming up with this really cool title, and now I actually have to deliver something behind that. So I guess I don't. But I guess I've just added something to your like books to maybe look at in the future list. Um,
Oh,
it looks bad.
the it lists tropes at the bottom, and like the first
Oof.
one is subverting gender norms, and that makes me nervous. Because like,
Yeah.
and then the third one is strong female heroine.
I want all my
Like,
heroine to be strong.
I, you know, like it could be really good, but those things make me slightly nervous.
But that's like a thing that like, I I really find the whole discussion about tropes super weird because obviously that's partly because I've never dabbled in like fan fiction. I've never been in that space, and but so much of literature conversations these days is very much about tropes, and I was like, yeah, it's got like a strong enemies to lover trope, and it's got this and this. And it's like, are you still writing stories, or are you just checking boxes at this point? And I don't know if that's just like me being old and white and male, or if that's like, or and like like an elitist smartass, or if that's just like a general feeling, or where that whole like reliance on tropes comes from. Because like, I mean, that's like, for example, like the way that, say, Fourth Wing and like other like romantasy or romance books are often like marketed with these tropes as like sort of, this is what you get. And I find that interesting in like an approach towards like books. I don't know.
I think that the very trope heavy books are popular, and I think that that is because of the trope marketing, and people like they want to know in advance what they're getting into and what they're going to get. And like if you hear, oh, it's this trope, this trope, this trope, this trope, then like you know what it's going to be. And like that is also I think part of popularity of the romance genre, which is like just in publishing in general, like the best selling genre, like straight up romance.
Yeah.
Like throughout, it's like been that for decades. And that is because you know, like at the end, the couple is going to come together. They're going to have this happily ever after. You know what you're getting into, and you know that that is always what it's going to be. And I think that a certain part of the reader, like a certain group of readers, they don't need to, like, they're not looking for, oh, how is this going to end? Like, will the bad guy win? Will the good guys win? They just want predictability because, like,
Yeah.
life is already chaotic and unpredictable enough, and they just want this one thing that they know that will be all right in the end.
Yeah.
I think that's the same sort of like psychological mechanism that also like makes those books that are very much marketed with the tropes, like they're gonna pick up that because they know what to expect.
I find it super interesting because you have that part like where everything is described in tropes. And yeah, Joe, I know that it's like very important for marketing in indie, and I get it as a marketing tool in general. What I find interesting is that you have tropes on the one hand that are heavily emphasized, and on the other hand, you have people yelling about like spoilers at every moment. It's like, how is having enemies to lovers as a trope written on your back cover not a spoiler? Like, and I find that interesting because obviously it's not, because you're reading this book in that regard for something else than you would read like a different book. It's like, I find it interesting how those two things are both sort of like gaining in like impact in like like general media discourse, I guess, on the internet. On the one hand, the reducing to tropes that could be considered spoilers on the one hand, and the emphasis on avoiding spoilers at all costs on the other hand. And of course, then you have something like content warnings. It's like content warnings are apparently spoilers, but having an enemies to lovers trope written on the back cover is not a spoiler. Feels all weird, but I find it interesting in that regard. It's like how we sort of approach fiction.
I think that is also very genre based because I feel like the very trope heavy things is mostly like romance and fantasy romance, and I feel like those are not like people are not complaining about spoilers for those books. Maybe like the fantasy romance one that do have a bigger like fantasy plot that I don't want it to be spoiled for that, but I don't think anyone complains about being spoiled for a romance. ever.
This is a book with a complicated fantasy plot. Also, dragons fuck. Sorry, I keep coming back to it because it's just so, I don't know. It just feels so funny because like the only dragon book that I've read in a long time was the last book with like dragons that have like personality and talk was the first Temeraire book by Naomi Novik, and it's so decidedly YA to almost middle grade that the shift from like in my brain I'm like, how can the dragons from that one be the dragons from Fourth Wing, which is obviously not, but it creates weird things in my mind. Anyway, have you seen Cleo's question? In case you want to answer that
Yes,
one.
I just wanted to address it now.
Very good.
I don't wear makeup, like ever, because I just can't be bothered. Also, I have a couple of like skin allergies, so like I would have to pay too much attention of what I'm buying, and I can't be bothered. And the thing is, if you never wear makeup, I think like people get to know you as the way you look, and so like they don't necessarily expect that. I think if you up all the time and then suddenly you don't wear it anymore, then they're gonna be like, "Are you okay? You look kind of sick or something." Like maybe not, or like you look tired. Are you okay? And like I'm just not wearing makeup today. So I have friends who like have that.
Yeah.
I don't, but yeah, I know that it's a thing that people feel that they need. Which if you feel like you need to do it, like I wouldn't wish that upon you, because it should always be a choice of whether you want to do it or not. Of course. So yeah.
That's an interesting one that Ida just asked Joe there about writing to market or write. But that I think that's like an interesting question in general, because it's it kind of goes back to the idea of like, why do you tell stories, right? It's like, why do you write? Do you want to become a writer, or do you want to be a storyteller, right? It's like, do you want to tell things and do stuff that you want to do, or are, are you looking for a job, or are you looking for self-expression? Obviously you can make self-expression your job, but I think it's interesting that writer, and maybe that's partly just because it's now so visible with writer Twitter and writer Reddit and whatnot, and you have all these communities where suddenly you have people talking more openly about the craft, whereas in pre-internet days, writers were these mysterious artists that probably all had like incredible drinking problems, were abusing their partners, and were all these other things, and we kind of thought that was like important to being like a good artist. But now like everyone is just on Twitter and is probably still has drinking problems or other substance abuse problems, is probably still abusing other people, and has like all these other, but it's happening in the open, and suddenly you sort of focus more on the idea that being a writer is about publishing books in a way. So I think there's like an interesting shift in that, like the internet or social media has sort of laid bare the fact that writing books can, or like as soon as you start actually selling these books, it becomes a job and has like all these other aspects to it that were sort of obscured by that whole like by the mystification that the publishing industry and the larger media sphere of journals and magazines and newspapers and critics and so forth sort of like we're sort of putting between the production of art and the reception of art by the audience. I think that has sort of been torn away by social media, and it's now being in the open. But yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't want to take away your answer, Joe. I just found it interesting, that topic, because it's certainly something I've thought about before myself. And, obviously you see that when right now there's as I said, like I sometimes browse that like list of pre-orders on Audible, and there's like you can see as soon as Legends and Lattes became big, suddenly there were like not hundreds, but like dozens of different series of coffee shop or like gastro themed cozy fantasy books coming out, and there's, I don't know, the Crescent Moon Tea Room and the, I don't know, A Pirate's Life for Tea and stuff like coffee and tea. Fantasy books are suddenly really, really, really big, and there's the one that like drives me nuts. It's called "You Can't Spell Treason Without Spelling Tea," and I'm like, yes, you can. That's the point. So you can see how that's sort of like the market, and especially with like self-publishing being even more driven by, you know, search engine optimization and all these other like gaming the algorithm kind of things. It's sort of leads to that being even more prevalent. Whereas I think with like older traditional publishing, it took a while, right? It's like Dan Brown publishes the Da Vinci Code, and it becomes a huge thing. But mainstream publishing, you know, having like a front load time of like, I don't know, 2 years or whatever, it takes until like 2004 for all the other stupid here's a mystery and a painting novels to be actually published, because, you know, and that has been taken away with like self-publishing, where people can just, if they're quick at writing, probably, and now with like ChatGPT or whatever, even quicker, can just like churn out weird books about coffee shops within like hours, basically, of something going viral. And I think that also has sort of like laid bare stuff.
I think, Cleo, to your point, I get it, but also publishers are businesses and they want to make money, and if they think that something's going to sell, like, that's the thing that they're going to invest in. And then for self-pub, like, I don't know if there's necessarily more of them. Like, I think that without the success of Lettuce and Lattes, they would have been around, but just people wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is also a part of it. Like, indie and self-pub is so much bigger than like what you see hyped. Even among people, like, no shade to anyone, like, you can't obviously like know about everything that comes out, but there are, even within like fantasy readers who, or like people who sort of like branch out and read more obscure things, there is still like often there are a few like real hidden gems, but there's still also the things that they're seeing, which again is understandable, because like you can't read something if you don't know that it exists. But there's just it's just such a massive amount of books are being put every minute. You know.
Yeah. Joe, if you write Gargoyles and Gas Stations, a cozy diesel punk romance, I will definitely read it. I will talk about it on a video. Joe, in chat, he just like...
I love that. I want an arc of that.
I'm glad I'm not alone with my hatred for that title run. I'm very glad. It's been driving me nuts for like months now. Yeah, I don't know. I think, how to say that? Obviously, like the publishing market being, you know, being under capitalism in the way that we have capitalism these days is all about, you know, short-term planning and no longer like long-term investments in any way, shape, or form, because the goal is not to actually publish books. The goal is to give money to the stakeholders, and that leads to like pushing ever shorter circles. And I mean, I haven't read it. Neither have you yet, Kat. But I've heard a lot of issues around Iron Flame being like poorly edited, and the books having like incredibly bad like production value issues, and like pages falling out and stuff like that, because it was like, because, you know, Fourth Wing took off in all kinds of ways, so they had to push the next one as quickly as possible to sort of stay within that that book talk hype cycle before it kind of gets lost. And yeah, that's going to come at a cost, like a cost in quality at some point. And I don't know if I, like the whole like comparing book talk to fast fashion that the elitist, the literary elite is talking about, because I once again it so quickly kind of devolves into both sexism and general like snobbishness in a lot of ways. But there certainly is an aspect to that, in that if the goal is to make as much money right now, then yeah, that you're not producing art. You're obviously just like be a part. You're just another slave in the dark satanic mills of the culture industry at that point.
It's an interesting topic because I don't always know what happens like behind the scenes in publishing, of course. So I feel like I'm not I don't have enough information to like fully speak on that. But I think that pushing authors to write more and to mass produce and to whatever, I don't think that's a new thing though. I don't know.
Yeah, but Cleo, the thing is, Murakami works because Murakami sells, because the name Murakami is on there, and we don't necessarily do that kind. We don't do brand recognition over authors' names as much these days. Yes, there's a bunch of people whose names, but like people talk about Fourth Wing. People don't talk about Rebecca Yarros, even though she's written like a ton of like non-fantasy romance books before. So we don't necessarily have that. I mean, I guess we had it with what's her name, Sarah J. Maas. That she has like brand recognition as an author, as has Murakami. I think they're basically the same writer anyway, because I don't know where I'm going with this, because I haven't not read any Sarah J. Maas, and the only Murakami I read was 1Q84, and that was bad. And I hope there's less weird fetishism around teenage girls in. No, fuck. Okay, they're the same anyway.
If you don't mind, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom because I've been trying to hold up, but nature.
Sure. nature is bad. No, I'm sorry about the Murakami bashing, Cleo. I know you have read a lot of Murakami. I guess I just like got off. Reading 1Q84 was probably a bad choice as a start, but it was just like published at the time, and everyone was like, "Oh, you got to read Murakami." I was like, "Oh, he's got a new book out. I'm gonna try this," and then it was weird as fuck. So that's a question, like, Cleo. Do you think that's a Murakami thing? Do you think that's a cultural, like, because of him being part of Japanese culture, which I know nothing about? So I was just wondering about that, because like my impression of reading Murakami was that he felt, or at least 1Q84 felt oddly Western, in the way of like someone who is not part of like fully part of like the Anglo-American literary tradition, sort of trying to write in that specific sort of like space. And you have this sort of like weird, almost uncanny valley between like Murakami's cultural background and it obviously being set in Japan and everything, but you always have these weird bits of like very deliberately like the great American novel kind of stuff kind of creeping in. That felt super weird to me. In a way, that's, for example, reading the other Japanese book that I've read, that being the Memory Police by whatever name, did not feel that felt more Japanese or like I didn't have that uncanny valley feeling that I think kind of really creeped me out with Murakami, beyond just the weird fixation on teenage girls.
I'm back.
So yeah, that's you missed me talking about being incredibly racist about Murakami, I guess.
Oh dear. I have never read anything by Murakami, and I don't have the slightest urge to do so. I don't think I would like it.
I don't know. I think it's also just like very navel gazy in a boring way because it's a very annoying people spending way too much time being depressed about how they are annoying people. Well, I guess Britain. Don't start with 1Q84 is my recommendation about Murakami. Although I think Cleo said that she really likes that. You really like that book, right? So I'm sorry if I bashed it too much. Anyway,
I feel like people like Norwegian Wood. I think that's his most popular one.
Ron, that's very funny. I don't know anything about Japanese writers. I have decided to not think too much about Japanese culture and literature because I feel like I can't afford to get into yet another topic. So I'm like, yeah, I know there's a lot there. I just don't have the time for that. Anyway, to go back, have you read Sarah J. Maas, Kat? After all, you're a fairy librarian, although
I'm
not a
in
fey
fact
librarian.
currently reading Cred of Midnight, which is the second Throne of Glass book.
Okay.
I
What's that
tried.
compared to Crescent City? Is an urban fantasy thing?
I haven't read Urban City, Crescent City,
Crescent.
so I don't know. But yes, that is an urban fantasy from what I've heard, and I felt like every single creature in every fantasy book that has ever existed is in that book, from what I've heard.
Well, that's fine. That's the same with what's his face, the Dresden Files book. So that makes sense.
Um, so yeah, I haven't read Crescent City. I tried reading ACOTAR. It was in 2020 because it was during lockdown. I remember that. And I was 15, and like 15 is not the age where you should be reading ACOTAR. I mean, the first book is still fine. It's like the second book onward that starts getting more,
Yeah.
you know. But I was like, I liked it enough to finish the book, but I didn't care enough to continue the series at the time. But I'm currently reading through Sarah J. Maas, and I'm going to be reading ACOTAR.
Okay. So what is ACOTAR is fairy stuff, right? Well, fae, which are the badass goth emo fairies, right?
Yeah.
Sort of. And Throne of Glass, what's that about?
The first book is an assassin competition, and then we move from there, and like the plot becomes more like true fantasy rather than fantasy romance. But it's like also an intricate universe. The Sarah J. Maas books. So Throne of Glass also has Fane.
Yeah. I know assassins are like another one that I really don't like, and I blame Brent Weeks. I read his whatever that one was called, teenage assassin books, and they're I don't know. I just don't think assassins are really interesting, especially when you have like an assassins competition or whatever. Ooh, now that you've
like it's not really an assassins competition, but it's like like trials in a competition, and the main character is an assassin. And there's a
welcome to the murder championship. No, I know that you've just like DNF'd sorcery, but when you come to book 7 in Discworld, that being Pyramids, it has a very interesting assassins competition kind of thing because it starts with the main character having to finish his final exams in the Assassin's Guild, and it's really well done. It's one of the like best sequences, like just like the way it's choreographed is a really, really well done sequence in any Discworld book. But it's like after that, I don't know. Assassins, I don't know. It's Assassins.
Burton asked about my Dark Vanessa.
Yeah.
I have read it. I liked it. But not a new favorite or something. I thought that some scenes were very like emotional and very well done. But it was a little bit too long, I felt. And yeah, definitely well written. That's my review.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. Joe has announced a release date for Gargoyles and Gas Stations. I am impressed. I applaud your dedication there. Also, hey, Matt and other people.
See that the writing is very, very readable, and I think that's also part of the popularity of JMS. There's a few channels I follow who like they're like, she's for when I have bad mental health because I don't need to think about it that hard and I could just fly through it. And she writes mental health stuff like pretty good. And I definitely can see that. So
I have never heard of King's Dark Tidings, but that's because I don't read fantasy, apparently.
I haven't heard it either. Let me look that up. With my loud typing, I've been told.
What? Sorry?
I've been told that I type really loud.
Well...
Is it by Calcade? Cleo? Is that the one?
I assume so. So I assume, Britain, you're still talking about my Dark Vanessa? I have really liking it. I don't know. I have only heard about the title. I have no idea what the book is about. It's like apparently it's something that people on Book Talk like. And I'm like, okay, sounds fine.
My Dark Vanessa or what?
Yeah, my Dark Vanessa. I've never read it.
It's about a girl who enters a romantic relationship with her teacher, and then what happens, and like we get like the also like when she's an adult, like looking back at it. It's pretty. There's some heavy scenes in that, and some really gripping scenes. But you know, like it's not my genre. Yeah. Usually, I think that if it was more my genre, I would have, you know, like it maybe could have been a favorite if that was more like the type of book that I loved. But I did like it, and I think it's definitely well written.
Okay. I want to like that very specific genre. I think is really fascinating, in that it's so heavily dominated by Nabokov and Lolita, and it's like every time you have like that very specific form of like, you know, what you might call relationship or not relationship, whatever you want to call it, with one person in power over a younger woman. In a way, it's like it always gets related back to it, and that makes like discourse around it already sort of like that frames discourse around it already in like a very specific and usually detrimental way that I find super fascinating. Like how one book has sort of like this singularity effect on like a whole topic in a lot of ways. Obviously it's not the only book that has that, but I feel like that very specific genre feels always like it's always sort of like hovering in the background.
Lolita is even featured in My Dark Vanessa as a book that the teacher gave Vanessa to be like, look at what a great love story and how romantic this is. And then she like totally biting.
Wait, is Dark Vanessa based on like a real story? Because I sort of remember some weird drama being there about something like that, because there's like 2 books.
The author said no, and then people kept like, but is it based on a real? Is this your own experience? Like, do you know this? Is this you? Is this you? Is you? And at the end, like the author had to be like, okay, yes, I've had something like similar, but she was sort of like forced to share that information that she didn't.
In the same way that the writer from like Love, Simon had to at some point come out and explain that she's actually bisexual, because people were blaming her for writing about writing about queer topics as being straight and whatnot.
Happens a lot with queer authors, that they're sort of forced to come out like that.
I mean, I think it's fascinating that it's like probably like another like sort of like side effect of obviously social media and whatnot, is like that in our need for authenticity, sort of like we demand sort of like it's like you do like representation, whether it's queer, POC or whatever, you do it, and if it doesn't fully align with my own experience, you'd better actually be part of the same group, so I can sort of accept your experience being different from mine, compared to if you're not. It's like, it's because obviously experience is always singular, right? It's like it's always individual, but we kind of demand we demand representation to be our individual experience, or at least verified by some sort of like connection back to the author also having a right to talk about it that way. And I understand where that comes from, but I'm sometimes wondering whether it obviously has its very specific negative sides, as in forcing authors, queer creators, or in this case with My Dark Vanessa, the author to sort of actually admit to some personal stuff that probably actually shouldn't matter at all.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not asking Vladimir Nabokov if he was a pedophile or not.
I think part of it is that a lot of representation of marginalized groups up until not super long ago actually was mostly done by like like the cis straight white dudes, quote unquote, but like, and it wasn't good because a lot of like harmful stereotypes were perpetuated, and so they say like we maybe want to hear like what this thing is like from people who actually experience it. I think that's one component. Second component, also, these authors, like marginalized authors, don't always get the same opportunities in publishing. And so like if publishing has the option of like, say, a queer coming out story like Love, Simon is, and they have the choice between straight author or queer author, I think it stems from that.
I certainly can see that in the. I mean, both of those are like very valid, ideas. But on the other hand, like if you find yourself in a specific representation, obviously, Love, Simon spoke to a lot of people even before that was known. So obviously, it is successful as art. But then again, like in an age of social media and so forth, I guess it's so much harder to sort of separate art and artist in any way, shape, or form. Even, I mean, it was never possible to fully do that, but right now it's because artists are sort of required almost to sort of like identify themselves or be part of the marketing for like the artwork in a lot of ways, that it suddenly becomes even harder to sort of separate that. At least it's something sorry.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi is being crappy again, so like I only heard half of what you just said.
Oh no. So your Wi-Fi is as as active or like as permanent as Belgian governments, right? It's like sometimes you have one.
And like just when you were talking about my crappy Wi-Fi, it happened again. So like you still.
No, I just said like your Wi-Fi is almost as present as a Belgian government from time to time.
Well.
No, but like
We still hold the world record of like the longest time between like elections and the formation of a government.
Look, in the long list of possible records you can have about governments, I think the "we didn't have one" record is probably the best one, because obviously the government didn't collapse or anything. So, yeah, no, but yeah, I mostly I agree with you that the need for having people of your own like marginalized group actually get sort of to be the people talking about it, I think is obviously it's an important part. On the other hand, I think, and that's one of those things that I find fascinating, is like the other side of that argument is obviously that like if you are part of one specific marginalized group and you're known as part of that, obviously, you know, if you're queer, then you obviously have to out yourself, but like or someone else does it against your will. But you know, if you're known as part of a specific group, there comes almost like this expectation that you have to talk about yourself, or like not yourself, but like your specific experience in the books you write. Like if you're like if you're white, you're not allowed to write. If you're a straight white dude like me, you shouldn't write about queer experiences or POC experience or whatnot. On the other hand, if you're queer or a POC, or in my case I'm disabled, it's like suddenly I kind of have to write about disability, because obviously if the others can't do it, then I kind of have the sort of responsibility. And I think it sometimes feels like there is sort of that expectation, which once again limits marginalized people because it reduces them to like the thing that makes them marginalized. And I don't know where that is going. In the long run, I just hope, like, you know, over time that stuff will just like equal out and we can all write about whatever or talk about whatever. But I think there's like this sort of like weird sort of counterforce there in a way.
Mm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I think in the specific case of Love, Simon as well, like the book is, it's not just a book with a gay main character. Like the book is about being gay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is mostly what people were getting at. They're like, who are you to like make this the central theme of your book? I think is sort of the underlying sentiment. I don't agree with it, but I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess like my expectation would be that like if someone writes about that experience and it feels authentic to me, then I'll just assume that they have some, you know, valid insight in that experience, whether it is because they are, you know, gay themselves, or have like, I don't know, like their best friend was gay or whatever. Like I assume they have privileged insight if they manage to actually portray that in like in an authentic way, like or an authentic seeming way. Then I'll just assume that, because, you know.
Yeah. Also, I don't. I'm like, so I don't really look into authors ever. Like, I don't watch author interviews. I just, who the author is doesn't interest me all that much. Like I've mentioned it before on Discord, but like the way I like to see books, and maybe this is weird, I don't know, but I like to that they aren't really written by an author, but like there is some sort of alternate universe where this has really happened, and I just get to look into that alternate universe.
Mm-hmm.
And so then like I just don't care about authors.
Yeah.
Which is a bit like blunt, but like I just don't.
Yeah. I might, I think it really depends on the kind of book, because you have like your sort of like autobiographical fiction and stuff like that. In that case, yeah, you know, there's, but that's like an authorial decision to put like you as a person into the text, and then you have to live with that. But like also, Britain, I think sensitivity readers are actually a really good thing. In the way that, like, if I write about something that I don't know much about, and I have someone who knows stuff about that, having them read whatever I do and tell me, if I get it or not, I think is a really helpful thing. It's like something I will always do. It's like when I make videos about stuff where I'm, a bystander, so to speak, I'll try to find people to look over that have like a personal experience in some way or form. It's like, yeah, do I get it right, or do I accidentally, fuck up and say something incredibly insulting because I don't have like first person experience? I think in that sense, sensitivity readers are a good thing. There's obviously the point that the word sensitivity has been sort of like has a lot of like negative connotations thanks to like the right wing in the culture wars, where suddenly being sensitive is almost like an insult. So I see the label issue, but like in general, I feel that having sensitivity readers is a good thing if you're trying to, deal with like difficult subjects. I mean, you'd also have like, if you write something about physics and stuff, you'd also have like someone, and you're not an expert in physics or mathematics or whatever, you'd probably also have like an expert double check the things you're writing just to make sure it's right. So why not also have that when it comes to, I don't know, different forms of marginalization? I think it just makes sense to have that.
Yeah. I think like sensitivity readers is more like just to double check.
Yeah.
Like that you don't unintentionally like say something harmful or something that you don't want to be saying, that you're not aware of because you're not part of a certain identity.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously like you can always you can overdo everything. It's like, do I need straight sensitivity readers if I'm a queer person and writing a book? I don't know.
That
Possibly.
sounds like some super right wing of like the queer have taken over.
It's so frustrating. But yeah, like obviously, like every perspective that is not my own perspective will always sort of be, differ from other people's perspectives. So yes, in theory, I can always ask, and we all do that, right? It's like even if I'm, not having someone write, read the thing that I've written or like watch the video that I've made, I ask people, I talk to people about stuff, right? It's like, and that's sort of like, if you do that enough, then obviously you already try to. I mean, I assume that most of us try to get it right in the larger field of getting it right. It's like I do something, I want to get it. I sort of want to get it sort of right-ish, and I assume most people do that. And the way we go about it is obviously different from person to person, but
Ron, you've pointed out the true injustice in this world, and that is bad word facts.
Yeah.
Let's start the revolution now.
Bad bird facts. Yeah. But I have my ongoing war against owls. I still feel like I'm paranoid about owls because I have owls, like some form of owl, living in the forest
You
next
don't
to
like
my.
owls?
So here's the thing: I started learning Italian on Duolingo, and then I stopped like after two days because I got like distracted, and then that owl sent me passive aggressive messages. And then it got summer, and now I hear the owls hooting outside of my window. And I feel that it's still the Duolingo owl sending its agents, making sure that I start learning Italian again. um,
Like, I don't accept hatred towards owls, okay? Like, owls are
do,
cool and fun. I collect owls, like little owl babies. I like it.
No, owls are cool. Do the owls in Harry Potter have like a union? Probably not, because I don't think J.K. Rowling approves of unionizing. But what do the owls sound like? I don't know. I assume it's the oh gods. So in Germany you have like this weird differentiation between like the smaller owls, which we call Kauts, and I have no idea what the English word for that is. And then you have like the big ones that are called something owl, and I assume it's one of the smaller ones, but it has the very characteristic owl hooting sound.
Well, in English, you do have the distinction between owl and uhu.
Yeah, and the ooh is
Is
the
that the
ones with like the big ears,
ones
right?
with ears?
Yeah.
And the owls are the ones without ears. Or like without floofs as ears. Like external.
Ah, caw. Okay, so yeah, we have the okay, in English the differentiation is between caw and owl, and I suspect it's some caw thing because we don't have that many big owls in smaller forests in Germany, so I assume it's one of the smaller ones. But they're fucking loud. They're really really loud. I can't stress this enough. They are incredibly loud, and they give me paranoia about my language, my disability, not my inability to learn languages.
Fun fact about owls: in ancient Rome, they were often linked with vampires.
Okay,
So, like, people were a little bit
interesting.
scared of owls.
Do you have any idea why?
I don't know. I guess like this random thing that's like hooting in the middle of the night. Like I get that being a little scary. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's something. There's not that many things that fly at night, right? It's bats and owls, and one of them
Yeah.
is, well, one of them is already like the animal for vigilante that beat up people all the time. So the other one has to be about vampires.
Yeah. Like, and we associate bats with vampires, right?
Yeah, that's why the guy that beats up people in Watchmen is called Night Owl. Wait, that was maybe. Oh, although I assume that Britain got the joke. Anyway, I'm checking the time. We've been doing this for like 2.5 hours. How do you feel, Kat?
I definitely would like to go to bed before midnight. So like that's a half an hour, but
In that case,
I
let's
could still
sort
wake
of
back
like
up.
wind this down because I am feeling the same call of nature that you were feeling a while ago. So let's wind this down. I first of all, thank you for actually doing this. I really appreciated it. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had some fun.
Had fun. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thanks everyone for hanging out in the chat. I also really appreciate that. We got a new book out of this, so that's a big win already.
We
Yeah,
all
if
learned about Medievally Blonde.
you learned about Medievally Blonde, so even that. So yeah. Subscribe to Kat's the Fairy Librarian. I'll link the channel in the description. Again, I'll tag it once once the thing is over. Before, for whatever reason, I couldn't actually make the tag work and like setup earlier, so I'll do that. Subscribe and tell Kat nice things in the comments. I think that's what we've learned today. Those of you who are on the Unabridged Burners Discord server will going to have a general hangout after show whatever thing in the voice chat there, as organized by the amazing Ben, who has been lurking in chat, I assume, because she said hello at the beginning. And yeah, I don't know if you want to join that as well. You can always join that Discord. It's probably linked in the description somewhere. And I think that's all. So yeah, once again, thanks for doing that, and I'll try to find the button for actually stopping this mess. It's like Speed. It's like the bus that is like hurtling towards destruction, and you can't find the point to stop. But it's a live stream, and for whatever reason, Sandra Bullock is not actually trying to stop my live stream.
Wait, what?
You don't know that movie? It's like a late 90s, early 2000s movie. It's called Speed, and then was a second part when it was on a boat. And the whole plot, it's like an action movie. And it's like this bus, and it has like a bomb on it. And as soon as the bus starts drive, it slows down under a certain speed limit, the bomb will explode. And then the whole thing is about like how to disarm the thing on the bus while it's racing through whatever city it was. I don't know. It's a terrible movie. But the main thing is you can't stop. And then there's the second part when they do the same fucking thing on a boat. Yes, the 90s were definitely a high point in movie making.
It sounds like a time.
Yeah, well, and as long as I don't find the button to stop the stream, this is basically the same thing because it can't stop. But I found the button, so thank you everyone for being here, and yeah, I'll see you very soon until I find that button. Here we go. Well, bye.